Welcome to the RotoWire Prospect Podcast. I'm your host, James Anderson, and joined this week by Melissa Lockard, who covers the Oakland A's for The Athletic. And Melissa is as plugged in and as knowledgeable as any beat writer, beat reporter that I know. And I just thought it would be really fun to kind of talk about the A's, even though, they don't have a ton of big names on the big league roster, but we have so many players on this roster who are kind of getting a chance to show what they have at the big league level, and they've got a replenished farm system. So I thought it would be a great time to have Melissa on. Melissa, thanks for joining me. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
So before we get into any players, I just really wanted to quickly let you sort of give kind of a report on where things kind of stand with fans and ownership there, because I know that's been kind of a messy situation for a while now, and it's kind of coming to a head, it seems, this year. What's your sort of read on this whole situation from someone who is pretty plugged in there?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a strange time. The stadium saga has been one that has gone on, really for almost 25 years. It's been a long time. And it's at a point where, from a votes perspective, from some of the regulatory work perspective that there's kind of a tipping point that's coming soon about whether they're going to be able to build that stadium and Howard Terminal in Oakland that they would like to build. And it's coming at the same time that, ownership has decided basically not to invest anything in anything but, this stadium project, which, I mean, from a business perspective, perhaps you could see some reasoning behind it, but they've done it with very little communication whatsoever with their fan base. They've also raised ticket prices at the current location, which seemed awfully tone deaf when you consider the moves that they were making on the field. And coming off of a pandemic, which, out in the Bay Area, certainly there has been less of a quick return to, I think, what people would consider normal. In general, I think you saw the Giants' attendance was not pre-pandemic levels in their initial homestand either. So all those things coming together at once, have created a situation where I think crowds like you saw in the Tuesday night game are going to be fairly common at the start of the year. That being said, it's a fan base that has loved this team through some really bad stuff over the years. And this team so far has had the kind of personality that I think fans really identify with and can kind of get behind. And if perhaps they lower the ticket prices, I think you might see the seats fill up pretty quickly. Not full capacity, but certainly respectable crowds. So we'll have to see which way they're going. They operate so leanly in terms of back office personnel on all sides that I think sometimes what looks like indifference is actually just not enough people to do all the jobs that need to get done, which is such a shame. So that's kind of where it's at right now.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely always gotten the sense from afar that the A's have a great fan base, and it's a shame that this is kind of where we're at. But yeah, I mean, let's get into these players. I think I just want to start at catcher. Sean Murphy, to me, is just a really solid real life player. Defense, power. But he's kind of always had some durability issues. He's a big guy. It seemed like he maybe wore down towards the end of last season. And then they acquired Shea Langoliers, who in many ways is kind of a similar player to Murphy, where he's a defender, a good defender who's got some pop in the bat at catcher. Do you sort of see those two maybe at this point next year just having an even split there in an effort to kind of keep Murphy healthy all season?
Yeah, it's really been interesting because, Murphy was, from the moment he arrived, in professional baseball, a big league catcher, really. Like, his defense was that good, even in short season, which is kind of hard to even believe when you see catching at the minor league level most of the time. And so his hitting was something he hadn't really put a lot of time into, frankly, into a certain point. And he really did start zeroing in on that. And you've seen the fruits of that. You've seen even this season so far, when they've been resting him, he's often been the DH and number 4 hitter in this lineup. And granted, it's a kind of different sort of lineup, but still it's a number 4 hitter for a catcher. So I don't know that we've seen the full potential of what Sean Murphy can be yet. Many of his injuries were kind of fluky. There were 2 hamate bone injuries. There was a collapsed lung. things that are not necessarily baseball related that landed him on the shelf. So, but that being said, I remember last year when they required Yan Gomes, Bob Melvin said, listen, the day of catchers catching 140 games the way Jonathan Lucroy or Jason Kendall might have done in the past are over. Like, that's just not something they would want to do. And you need two good catchers on a competitive team. So definitely I could see him sharing time with Shea Langoliers. I think it gives them a lot of flexibility to have two players that were, of that caliber at that position. That's such a hard position to fill. They really didn't have much depth behind Murphy before this year. I think you've seen, Tyler Soderstrom is maybe going to stick a catcher. And I know we'll probably talk a lot more about him later. But he's a bat first catcher, certainly, and is a couple of years away. You got Jonah Bride moving to catcher, but was really a third baseman. And that was kind of it. Kyle McCann's looked a little better at Double-A than he did last year, but this gave them actual real depth behind a very important position. So I don't know if we can project fully what's going to happen yet, but them sharing that position, I think both could still get regular at bats, going through DH.
So for fantasy purposes, I think people have been very interested to sort of see how the playing time is going to shake out here, because there are at bats to be had at almost every position if guys perform. How much are you buying the hot starts from a couple veterans in Elvis Andrus and Jed Lowry, and then a younger guy who's kind of, he's had some shots here and there, but has never really quite put it together in Sheldon Neuse?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Elvis was a lot better after the first 6 weeks of last season. And I don't know that he'll ever come close to what he was with Texas, but I think he's better than what his overall numbers would have indicated last year. That being said, I'm not expecting like a breakout year from him. Jed was interesting because I think if you looked at his batted ball data last year, he had some of the hardest hit rates of anybody in the league, really. And I think what needs to be done with him is just monitoring his playing time, figuring out where he'll play defensively. I think he's probably detrimental in most positions that you'd put him at, but you can move him around. Obviously he's on the COVID IL right now, so it's not clear exactly when he'll come back, but I think he will get regular playing time. I think Elvis will probably get regular playing time up until the point that perhaps he's playing well enough that they can deal him so that they can give that playing time to Nick Allen, which I think they'd prefer to do at some point. And then Sheldon, I've always been a big fan of Sheldon Neuse. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that in the A's system, there were some people who in their player development department that thought he was their best prospect. And, he hit some developmental kind of challenges at AAA. His approach was needing work. And then they got to a point last year where he hadn't put it together yet and they needed a reliever. They made that trade. But I always really liked what he could do with the bat if he could get the ball in the air a little more. And it looks like his swing has changed just enough that he might be able to do that a little bit. And the fact that he can play second and third base, he can play some first base if you need him to, really gives him the flexibility to get some pretty regular playing time.
Where's Neuse's best defensive position, you think?
He's an awfully good third baseman when he's playing there every day. I mean, he was, he's not Matt Chapman, but he was not that far behind Matt Chapman in terms of what you would see from him coming up. Second base is new, and yet he really, he basically came up in 2019, had played like 4 games at second base, and they threw him out there and he did fine, which I think tells you quite a lot about his athleticism. A natural shortstop that just kind of got too big to stick there. But I think, I see him being somebody who could move around to both, little DJ LeMahieu kind of deal defensively and play some first base.
You mentioned Nick Allen in passing. He just got promoted to the big leagues for his big league debut. Obviously, defense has been sort of his calling card all the way up the ladder. And then there have been questions about just how much he's going to hit. Do you see him hitting enough to be an everyday player in time?
I do. He's really made some significant strides as a hitter. When he first came up, I think, he wanted to pull everything. I think he saw himself maybe a little bit different offensively than what his body type and swing path and everything was going to take him to. And, halfway through his first full professional year, they sat him down. They said, listen, right field is where you're going to live. This is the kind of player that you have to do. And he really bought into it. And he's not going to hit a ton of homers, but I think he's one of those guys that's going to run into a few, just sort of dropping the hands on an inside pitch, maybe Mark Ellis style, if you want to throw back a little bit. But that's actually sort of the kind of hitter I see him being. He's going to hit for decent average. He's going to get on base a decent amount. He's going to steal some bases. And then, he might run into 8 to 10 homers a year while playing outstanding defense.
Yeah, that's a good player. If he can just keep his
He's one of my favorites. Yeah. Everybody you talk to, coaches, teammates. It's just everybody that sees him play on a regular basis just absolutely loves Nick Allen. And this dates back to, when he was in high school. And I think that's the kind of player that you'll see when you get up there.
So another premium up the middle defender, Christian Pache, who they recently acquired this offseason. I've seen him make some pretty remarkable plays in the field. He hit his first pro home run, or big league home run, I should say. What's that experience been like so far?
Yeah, he's just a ball of energy, like a really fun player. I think in a different environment, probably his bat would need a little more time in AAA to get to where maybe he can maximize that. I think his approach hasn't quite, he's good bat to ball, but it's like maybe the pitch selection isn't quite what it could be at this point yet. But the defense is, better than I think I had even anticipated it being. The reads are really impressive. He's not afraid to take control of, he was calling off Elvis Andrus coming in on pop-ups and as a first-year rookie player and a veteran, that's pretty impressive to see somebody do that. I see him being somebody that's going to give you so much defensive value that the bat's probably just extra. And kind of Kevin Kiermaier-ish, I think maybe. But he's got enough power that I think, again, like he'll run into some home runs. The speed is really electric and kind of forces defenses to pay attention. And I think if you can have a lineup where he's at the bottom of it, and he's playing every day in center field, and that's productive, I think you're going to have a really solid team eventually.
Yeah, I thought the trade was really good for his career because he's the type of guy where I think he just needs to be left alone in the lineup. And his defense is obviously great, like you said, but I just think going from a team like Atlanta, where there was always going to be pressure on him to produce, to a team like Oakland, where he's got maybe a bit more of a free, runway to kind of show what he has. I think that could actually end up being really good for him.
Yeah, and he doesn't have the kind of expectations that came with everybody thinking he was the number one prospect in that organization too. And I know that can be a weight on players sometimes. So he kind of comes over as an unknown, and basically everyone's just tickled with everything that he's doing, which I think has been really fun.
So I've always had a soft spot for Tony Kemp, dating back to when he was in the Astros organization. Obviously some limitations physically and from a power standpoint, but I was really excited that he was going to get a shot to sort of show what he had this year, given the state of the roster. Do you think Tony Kemp can hold the leadoff spot for the A's all season? And do you think he profiles as someone who could be with this team for a while?
Yeah, I think from a hitting perspective, he does everything that they would really like to see from somebody at the top of the order. He's a very tough at bat. He's got the speed to make teams nervous when he gets on base. He can turn the lineup over either from the top or the bottom of the order. So I think, and he's got no ego. So you put him 9 or you put him 1, it's not going to impact him. I think the key is going to be whether defensively he can be solid enough that it's not an issue. I think so far the defense at second base has been more problematic than I was anticipating, frankly, from what I saw last year. Turns on double plays in particular have not been great. So, he can still play left field, but I think they may find better options from just an overall offensive production percentage, but I think they're going to give him a run because he was really effective at the plate last year. I mean, he was really one of their better hitters in like 350 or however many at bats that he got. So giving him a chance for 500 at bats, I think would certainly be worthwhile to do before you have to make a real decision about where he'd be full time. And he's such a great clubhouse guy and great guy to have around anyway that I think he's an asset to the team regardless.
That's interesting what you said about the defense, because yeah, I mean he can't really afford to slide down the defensive spectrum really.
Right.
So he is going to have to hold his own there. Do you think like how much runway does Kevin Smith have? I know that he was kind of a popular fantasy pick after that trade, just because people were looking at the AAA numbers and the power and the speed that he showed there. But obviously, we know the jump from AAA to the majors was massive last year, and he's already, I think, 25, and he's at a rough start. Do you think they give him a full season, or is he going to have to start producing?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, he just went on the IL today with a bone bruise in his ankle, so I don't know if that's going to keep him out a long time or a short time. And it's a shame because he actually really had, once he got to Toronto, I don't know if it was being around, familiar faces or whatever it was. What we saw in spring training from his bat really seemed to come back, and I think they were really pleased with how he hit in spring training. They liked, what they could see from him at shortstop and at third base. So I don't think they were going to give up on him just because of two bad series in Philadelphia and Tampa. But if the bone bruise is something that takes a while to heal, and somebody else like a Nick Allen or a Sheldon Noisy establishes themselves in the meantime, unfortunately, that could cut into the runway that he would have gotten. That being said, they have nothing but time this year, right? Like, as fun as the start has been, I don't think anyone's anticipating them competing all the way through the end of the year. And he's a player they really liked, so I don't see them not giving him at least another extended look at some point this season once he's healthy.
Okay, yeah, I totally missed that he went on the IL. So thanks for mentioning that. I mean, bone bruises are worse than they sound sometimes. So hopefully,
yeah, and it's one of those where it was like if he jammed his foot back into the bag, and given half the team is on the COVID IL, it's like maybe it's not something that would have been an IL situation, or if they didn't have such a shorthanded roster at the moment, and it is a 10-day IL right now. But we'll have to kind of wait and see on that. But it is a shame that he has to take time off because he was really swinging the bat a lot better.
Couple guys that have been with the A's prior to this season, seems like they could carve out really big roles on this team. Chad Pinder and then Seth Brown. Is Brown in a platoon right now? And then out of those two, who do you think is going to finish the season with better fantasy numbers?
Yeah, I mean, I think Brown, if you're looking for RBIs, I mean, the dude just knows how to bring runners in. And I know that's a very old-fashioned concept, that this idea that someone's like a run producer, but he really is exactly how you used to think of guys as being run producers. He's not a super high on base percentage guy, although he gives you good at bats. His batting average is going to be, probably pretty mediocre, but he's going to hit home runs and he's going to drive in a lot of runs. And that's always been his track record. And you've seen that already. I don't think he's in a platoon. I think, he's shown that he can hang in there enough against left-handed pitching. And, right now with the way the lineup is constructed, there's no reason to take him out. And he's played even some center field at this point. He's played some first base. He's played right field. So, I think that versatility gives them plenty of options to get him in pretty regularly. And Chad Pinder, if he can stay on the field, and again, he's one of these guys on the COVID list, and hopefully he's back soon. But they've always wanted to see what he could do if he was actually healthy enough to do it for a full season. Again, not a super high on base percentage guy, but he's somebody who probably could hit for higher average than, say, Brown would. The power has always been there. And the fact that he can play pretty much anywhere, I think is, pretty valuable when you're trying to stick somebody in your fantasy bench. So I think once he's back, you should see him in the lineup pretty regularly.
Yeah. So, I mean, he typically has moved around a lot, but then he's played, I think, 9 games in left field so far this year. Is that a spot where they're just going to kind of pencil him in there unless they really need him to move around somewhere else?
Well, it's interesting. He's really developed into an outstanding corner outfielder, which was a surprise given that he hadn't played outfield before he became a big leaguer. And then, with Noisy emerging as an option at third base, they haven't needed Pinder at third base as much. But they, I think, played him a lot there in spring training. And depending on how the outfield shakes out, you could see him being pushed to third base if they found 3 outfielders that they were wanting to play more regularly. So I think it's a little bit, I think honestly, every day is going to kind of it's going to drive fantasy people crazy, but it's going to be a little bit of a puzzle that they'll put together on a day-to-day basis for a while.
Yeah, I was trying to set our projected athletics batting order the other day against righties and lefties, and it gave me a headache just trying to figure that out.
Try to be Marcotte.
Maybe I buried the lead here a little bit, but I wanted to get the position players out of the way. Frankie Montas, he's probably the best player on the team. How long does he remain on this roster, given all the pieces they've already traded away?
Yeah, it's interesting, you got to the last couple of days of spring training, you thought maybe they're going to go with Montas and Manaea, given that spring training was almost over, and then they trade Manaea, and you think, well, why would they hold on to Montas? And yet they're kind of in his position now where, if you can pitch, you can be close enough to being competitive. And he does have another year before they have to make a decision because he's not a free agent until the end of next season. The trade deadline could create more pressure for teams to make better offers. I mean, the fact they were asking reportedly for Andrew Vaughn tells you that they're setting their sights super high because, Andrew Vaughn's a big league star now, right? So, I think that's a pretty strong indication that it's not going to be a quick move. But if someone blew them away, I think they could make a deal.
Yeah, I don't blame them for asking for that. I mean, that's the type of trade where, the White Sox are in absolute win now mode, and Vaughn, maybe he's a spare piece for them when they're at full health. So you might as well give that a try.
Yeah, it'd be a win-win for both teams, I would think.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And it would definitely be a win for Andrew Vaughn, so that he would have to stop playing like left field and
he'd be back home. So it'd be pretty good for him too.
So I picked up Paul Blackburn in some leagues recently. I'm not extremely confident in him having a breakout, but I could see how it would happen, and I think he's looked really good. When I watched him pitch, I was just really impressed by his composure on the mound and his competitiveness on the mound. And obviously he's added some ticks to the fastball this year. How big of a believer are you in what Paul Blackburn's done so far?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, he's always been very composed. He's always been a guy that, he came up in his first 4 or 5 big league starts with less stuff than he's got now. He was really effective, and then he got hit by a comebacker, broke his hand, and things haven't gone quite his way since then. But it was interesting last year. He had been DFA'd off the 40-man roster. He was pitching for Las Vegas, wasn't really paying that close attention to him. And, somebody said to me, listen, Paul Blackburn's good now. And I was like, really? And they were like, yeah, he's good now. Like, he kind of realized, I think maybe when he was DFA'd, that what he was doing was not going to get him back into a big league situation. And so he sat down with, I actually had an interview with A's throwing performance coach, Casey Upperman, that came out this weekend, and talked about, he basically sat down with Upperman and sat down with the kind of pitch design folks and said, how can I, get better? And from a physical perspective, he got stronger and more fit. And from, a couple of adjustments with his mechanics, he was able to do a few more things with his pitches to get them to play up more. And, the competitiveness was always there. And I think the control was always pretty good. It's just that the stuff wasn't good enough that it was going to matter how well he could locate it. And now it's a little bit better. So, I don't think you're going to look at somebody who's going to be like an ace or anything like that. But I think there's a decent possibility he's a solid 4 or 5 for a while.
Okay. Yeah, I'll take that. I'll take that on my AL only team. All right. This is one where I think the people that play fantasy are really going to be interested in your answer too. Who leads the team in saves this year?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, last night's was really interesting because you know that like Danny Jimenez had struggled through that ninth inning and got through it the night before, and then you start off with Sam Maul, and you're thinking, is Sam Maul really going to get a big league save? And then Zach Jackson comes in and gets it. I think Trevino will have that role when he's healthy for a while. But I could see Danny Jimenez or Zach Jackson moving into that closer role. I think it's going to be Trevino most nights, but by committee in the beginning. And then you may see one of those two emerge. And whether that's because Trevino is traded or whether it's because he goes back to a setup role, I think remains to be seen. But there's something about Trevino's off-speed pitches that hasn't quite been as effective. Like, you've looked at the data so far, the fastball, he's getting a ton of swings and misses on. But the curveball, which is usually one of his most devastating pitches, has gotten hit really hard. So if that doesn't change, he may not be the best option there in the ninth inning. And Jackson's a guy I think would have moved into their bullpen last year had he not gotten hurt in AAA. So really interesting kind of approach. He hides the ball really well. I think nobody sees him that well when the pitch is getting there. So, however many save opportunities there are, I think he could probably end up getting a decent number of them.
Interesting. Yeah, I did some research on Jimenez this past week because it looked like he might figure into that, but I hadn't done any digging on Jackson. That's a good name to keep in mind.
Yeah, two guys that were on the Blue Jays roster a couple of years ago, so it's interesting how those two organizations have come together.
All right, we are going to head to a few messages from our sponsors, and when we come back, we are going to talk about the A's farm system. Bet against others with no fees involved. That's right, no pesky hidden fees to ruin your day. Better Edge is a social betting marketplace where there's no fee on each transaction. Better Edge is a social betting marketplace, and chances are it's legal in your state. We bring betting back to its social roots where you can like, comment, and challenge other users all within the app. Play without getting played at Better Edge. Go to betteredge.com. That's BETTOREDGE.com to sign up today. Baseball is back. That's right. An entire glorious season, all 162 games. And with live events resuming, you can actually be there to catch all the action in person with Vivid Seats. Every backdoor slider, every round tripper, and every doubleheader can be experienced live. And with Vivid Seats rewards, you can start earning free tickets from your very first purchase. Just buy, collect stamps, and redeem. It's that easy. From behind the dugout to upper level, Vivid Seats has you covered for all the games that matter to you. Pro tip, buy tickets for your whole group, split the bill, and make progress towards your free tickets even faster. Just visit vividseats.com or download the app today. Vivid Seats, life happens live. All right, Melissa, we covered the big leaguers, and some of those guys are prospect eligible. And we can touch on some of those guys that we didn't hit that are still prospect eligible here. But I wanted to touch in quick on Tyler Soderstrom, obviously far and away the A's top prospect. At least that was the case certainly heading into the season and before all those transactions they made. Is he still just kind of leaps and bounds ahead of the rest of their prospects to you? And then what is sort of your read on where he ends up defensively?
Yeah, I mean, I think, he is an outstanding prospect. I think within the organization, he and Zack Gelof would have been 1A and 1B. I think they are extremely high on both of them. And I don't know that they necessarily have that huge gap between the two of them that maybe nationally it's viewed. But, Tyler is one of the more kind of composed and mature high school hitters I've seen in a really long time. I mean, he just came into pro ball basically like he was a 22-year-old college senior in terms of his approach, his knowledge of the game. He works really, really hard, uses the opposite field as well as I've seen any 18, 19-year-old hitter do, but also has the power to really pull the ball. And he's being challenged right now. He's still one of the youngest players in that Midwest League, and it's cold and he's never played in that weather. And I think that's, he's off to a bit of a slow start, but I don't think that's dimmed any expectations for him. Defensively, he took a lot of steps forward at catcher. He takes a lot of pride in being a catcher and wants to stay there. So I think they're going to give him, some leeway to stay there. The plan is really that he play like four games out of 6 a week behind the plate in those 6-game series, and then the other 2 he'd either be at first base or DH. So I think it remains to be seen. My gut is that he ends up a first baseman in the big leagues, just because the bat will eventually be so far ahead of the glove that you're not going to want to wait on it. But you never know. And the fact that he does have that kind of work ethic, there's still a chance that he could stick at catcher.
Yeah, I mean, first base is certainly seems like a hole, especially unless they acquire someone like Andrew Vaughn. So, and
right.
then you could see a scenario where in like a year, 14 months, 2 of their better players are both guys that can play catcher. So that'll definitely be interesting to follow. But yeah, I mean, if he really hits and kind of forces his way up the ladder with the bat, first base would be a solid spot for him.
Yeah. And there's some parallels to him as the high school potential first baseman and arriving at a similar time to Gelof as the polished college third baseman that you had with Matt Olson and Matt Chapman. And certainly that worked for them a few years ago.
Yeah. I'm loving what you're saying about Gelof, because I like after watching him I wasn't really plugged in on him heading into the draft, but obviously he put up big numbers in his debut, and he looks like such a natural at the plate. He's done nothing but hit at every stop since they drafted him. Does he remind you of anyone? Like what are his, does he have any weaknesses that he's going to have to kind of polish up before he gets to the big leagues?
Yeah, I mean, he's there's a little swing and miss in there that I think so many players come to professional ball with that he'll have to work on. But just a really electric player, like his strength. He didn't always try to hit home runs in college because that's just not the way that they play at Virginia. But he's got the power to do it. I think they've actually talked about how Soderstrom had a little more of an understanding of how to attack pitches to hit, look to hit homers than Gelof did, just because of the style of play, even though Soderstrom was younger, that Gelof had it at Virginia. So I think that's something they're working on with him, is getting him to get into that power a little more. But he's got speed. He can hit for average. The power will be there, because when he does get a hold of one, you can really see it. And defensively, there were some issues with his throwing in college because he had an injury, but since he's been healthy, they felt like the throwing's been fine, and they're trying him at second base as well, just so that he'll have the versatility to be able to do both, because I think they, again, envision a situation where you've got a number of good players that you can kind of move around. So I know I gave the LeMahieu comp with Noisy, but defensively, I think they'd envision similar sort of thing with Gelof.
Interesting. And did you kind of allude to the fact that you think he and Soderstrom maybe arrive on a similar timetable, or do you see Gelof getting there like a year ahead of him?
Yeah, I mean, I think Gelof is in Double A and Soderstrom's in High A, so probably Gelof gets there first, but maybe not a huge gap between them. I think players don't necessarily have to spend as much time in AAA as they used to, especially if they've got a really good sense to hit. And it's not out of the realm of possibility that Gelof gets to the big leagues even at the end of this year. I think probably more likely early next. But it's also not out of the realm of possibility that Soderstrom reaches the big leagues sometime next year too. So we'll have to see. I mean, they've got a lot of more moving parts than they had before the trades in terms of other players that can sneak in ahead of those guys. But I think there's still a big opportunity for them to move whenever they're ready.
So Max Muncy was selected 35 picks ahead of Gelof in last year's draft, and did not have the same type of debut, but obviously it was a really small sample in the complex league, and he's off to a really hot start at low A, but he is striking out a decent amount. It's only been 10 games. Do you know what the team's sort of expectations were for him this year? Did they see him breaking out?
Yeah, they loved what he did in the offseason. I mean, they loved him when they drafted him, but they really loved the work that he did in the offseason. He added a lot of strength to his frame, which I think, they felt he needed. They also really sat him down during instructs and basically were like, listen, you could overpower the ball in high school because you weren't facing this sort of this velo. They think he will have power as he physically gets bigger and stronger, but they want him to focus a lot more right now on being up the middle to the opposite field, learning to make good, solid contact without trying to pull the ball as much as he was trying to do it. And, he's already actually run into, I think he's hit 2 grand slams already this season, but he's getting hits really regularly. He's working the count better than he was last year. He's running the bases really well. And defensively, they were already very pleased with how he handled shortstop and second base. He's more mature defensively than he was even offensively. So, they were very excited about the entire draft class actually from last year. I think they felt like they came away with a lot of really good position players because so many other teams focused on pitching. And so you're seeing a lot of those guys get off to pretty good starts.
So I think the Athletics had a borderline unprecedented haul of incoming pitching prospects into the org this past offseason. Like we have JT Ginn, Gunnar Hoglund, Joey Estes, Ryan Cusick, Adam Oler, Colin Pellews was there. Zach Gelof, Adrian Martinez. Am I forgetting anyone? I mean,
those were the guys that they acquired, and then they were able to get guys like Danny Jimenez as minor league free agent signings too. They did a much better job of targeting those kind of players than they did last year. Also,
who kind of stands out to you from that group in terms of someone that you're really bullish on long term, or maybe even that the org is just really high on compared to the others?
Yeah, I mean, Ryan Cusick earlier today, finally ran into a rough inning, which he had not had, in his professional career yet. But I mean, it's his first full professional season, and he's starting at Double-A, which I think Sonny Gray is the last one I could think of that they did that with, and they overwhelmed with his stuff. He still got the changeup to work on, but as Gil Patterson, the minor league pitching coach or coordinator, said, when you throw your fastball and your breaking ball like that, I guess you don't necessarily need to change up that much. So they really love his stuff. JT Ginn, the sinker has just been, they said it's just like a nasty, nasty pitch. And as that pitch has become a little bit more popular again. Plus, I think, he's now a little more removed from the Tommy John surgery. I think some of that velo that maybe was lost last year kind of inches back up a little bit again. But they really like what they've seen there. Joey Estes was a pop-up guy with the Braves last year. I think started him at high A, but expected he'll spend a decent amount of time at Double-A by the end of the year. So yeah, I mean, I think, poor Adrian Martinez gets to go over and pitch in Las Vegas. So I think nobody enjoys that, but I think they like what he and potentially Adam Oller can provide to a back end of a rotation as well. But I think, Ginn and Cusick now, and then Hoglund once he's healthy and able to go, which I think they're looking like June for him to be able to get out to the field. Those three are going to be really fun to watch, I think.
Since you mentioned Estes and you mentioned Cusick, what kind of was your reaction, I guess, to that haul for Matt Olson at the time, and has your take on it changed at all? Because I think like so many people follow prospects now strictly for like fantasy and dynasty league value and that type of stuff. But I think this haul was definitely a much stronger package of prospects from a real life standpoint than from a fantasy standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, when I heard that's what they had got in return for Matt Olson, I was immediately impressed. The other ones took some digging to decide, what they were seeing from those packages, but that trade from just the reading the press release, knowing what you'd seen about Pache, knowing what you'd seen about Langoliers and Cusick. And Cusick is a pitcher that they were on, in the draft, and he got pick before Muncy. So to be able to get both those guys essentially out of that draft is a pretty good situation for them. So, I think that trade reminded me kind of like the Dan Herron to Arizona trade way back in the day, the Gio Gonzalez trade to the Nationals back in the day. They got a variety of different players that can play different roles. I think not that far from the big leagues, any of them. I mean, there's still a few rungs to go, but it's not like they're taking, rookie ball guys that they have to really reshape. These are guys that I think they know what they're getting, and they just kind of have to put the polishing touches on them. So I think from that perspective, it was a very strong haul, and it's extremely difficult to replace Matt Olson. I don't know that you can replace Matt Olson, but I do think they got a lot of value for him.
Yeah, Cusick, as you said, he went straight to Double-A this year, skipped over High A, and he has 42 strikeouts and 21 and a third pro innings. So obviously the bat missing stuff is there. He generates ground balls at an excellent clip. Is it going to be like, what do you think is more important for him? Just the command, or do you think he needs the third pitch at all? Because like when a guy has a really elite fastball slider combo, we've seen guys have success in recent years without that third pitch, as you said. But with him just being so big, I guess I don't know how you're projecting the command.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it can't hurt to have a good third pitch. And I think they've seen enough of the changeup occasionally flash as at least usable that it's worth pursuing. And it's worth maybe taking a few lumps to see if you can get it, because you're going to be better if you have that extra weapon. Interestingly, he's in the same rotation now with Colin Pellius, who you mentioned earlier, and they were both at Wake Forest, different years, but roughly the same time. And they're similar in that big body, power from the legs, can get a lot of swing and miss. But Pellius has a few more options. He doesn't have the elite stuff, but he's got very good stuff and a few more weapons he can pull out. But the changeup too with him is inconsistent. So with both of them, I think that'll probably be the focus. In Midland at the beginning of the year, but they know what they have with the other two pitches if that one doesn't work out, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, that's great that you brought up Pellius. I mean, I think just kind of talking through this, you're going to have some pitching prospects who just don't pan out, whether it's injuries or just pitching at the big league level is really, really hard. But they've given themselves a lot of bites at the apple, and it did seem like they, with maybe the exception of Estes, they were prioritizing guys that were close to the majors in those trades.
Yeah, I think so. And I think historically that's what you've seen them target with pitching when they've acquired them in trades. And as I talked about the draft a little bit last year too, I mean, it was almost amusing to see some teams zero in so much on pitching. And that did allow them to go reach for a lot of position players that they felt fell to them in different rounds. But that did mean that they, bypassed some pitchers as they were doing that. So being able to bring those guys in, created that depth, because for every one pitcher that you have success, you probably need 5 or 6 that are throwing well in the minor leagues to get that to stick. And I think that's always been their philosophy, is to add as much as they can there.
So the headliner in the Sean Manaea return, Uribe Angeles, am I saying that right?
Mm-hmm.
He obviously, the bat to ball, the batting averages he's logged in the lower levels as an age appropriate player, very, very impressive. I think a lot of people, at least sort of on the outside, were kind of like, that's all it took to get Sean Manaea, because he wasn't a guy who was top 100 prospect or anything like that. But what's sort of the scouting report on him, both offensively and defensively, for you, and how much power do you see him growing into long term?
Yeah, I think the power is sort of a remain to be seen, right? Because I think there's some question as to where he ends up with his maturation. But the bat to ball and the approach are all already pretty advanced. So I think he'll hit, and he may, whether he ends up being more like a Tony Kemp type offensive player in the big leagues, or whether he ends up being somebody who can add some power and become, a more special player, I think remains to be seen. I think shortstop, they'll see if it can stick there, and they'll give it a shot. He'll get a lot of time at second base as well, but I think they feel like he's an up the middle talent. It's just whether it's enough for an arm for an everyday shortstop or not.
I kind of skipped over him, but how has Dalton Jefferies looked this year? I'm always kind of just bracing for the next
Yeah.
setback on the physical side, but the strikeouts just haven't been there in recent years the way that they were back in 2019. Obviously, he's prevented runs, but how's he look this year?
Yeah, he's looked really good. I mean, he's, again, knock on wood, right? Like, to stay healthy. But I think, he's more of the traditional ground ball pitcher that you probably would have seen in the league more 5 or 6 years ago. Extremely efficient. I mean, I think he's been at like 60 pitches in the sixth inning, or fifth inning or whatever in each of his first two starts. And you can live with that, right? Like, and I think the swing and miss stuff hasn't necessarily come yet, but that wasn't really how he was pitching. I think he was pitching aggressively to get weak contact. And so, he's got enough stuff. I mean, he's got enough stuff that he can get strikeouts, I think, if he tries to set him up more. But that was where he was getting himself in trouble a little bit with some of his big league outings last year, and his debut in 2020. So I think his style of pitching to weak contact has been working for him. And if he's behind defenses that can handle that, I think he'll have success. So it's a similar profile to Sonny Gray, but it's not quite as much swing and miss, I think.
And then another guy that's had a ton of trouble just staying healthy, which is really, really unfortunate given how promising he seemed a few years ago, is AJ Puck. What kind of role do you think the A's kind of envision for him in that bullpen at this point? I assume have they pulled the plug on him as a starter officially? I know he's been working on the bullpen this year, but what kind of
Yeah.
role do they envision for him?
They haven't officially, like, they were talking about it in spring training, but it was like a 2-week spring training. There was no way they were going to build him up. And I actually probably should have had him as much of a candidate as Jackson and Jimenez for saves. Really, like, he's got the stuff, obviously, that he could turn into a Josh Hader kind of closer for you pretty quickly if he could stay healthy. It's really just been a run of bad luck. Like, every time he seems like he's on a roll, something happens. And in this case, it was, landing on the COVID IL. But he's off it today. So, assuming he's healthy and able to go, he's really looked pretty good in his first couple of outings so far this season. Confidence, I think, was a big thing, and just mentally trusting that he could find an arm slot that he's going to not feel pain when he's throwing. And it took some time for them to find one for him. And I think Upperman had a quote in that article where it was basically like, this, not searching for the perfect delivery, but searching for the perfect delivery for AJ. And so I think they think he's found one. And if he can find that and keep it, he's been back up to 96, 97, as opposed to 93 where he was last year. And he's still got that swing and miss breaking ball. He could end up becoming an elite reliever if he stays healthy, but it's just hard to know how that health is going to hold up over time.
It wasn't that long ago that we were talking about Austin Beck and Lazarito being two of the more exciting A's prospects. And I really hope that Pedro Pineda is not heading down that same path. And, Robert Poisson is kind of in that mix as well. Just guys where you can really dream on the tools, but the hit tool, the most important tool, just isn't quite there. Where do you stand on sort of Pineda's chances of making good on the power and speed upside that he has?
Yeah, I actually, they were really pleased with the kind of aptitude that he showed coming over last year. I think they felt like his bat to ball skills were more advanced than a number of the players they had brought over from the academy in recent years, including, most specifically Poisson. So, he's the, I think, second youngest player in the Cal League right now. They're giving him an aggressive assignment because they felt like he could handle it. He got hit on the hand over the weekend and didn't play on Tuesday. I don't know if he's going to be out for a little while, but he was already holding his own pretty well, all things considered. Physically, he's got a lot more growing to do, just like proper nutrition and getting, all the strength on. He's made a lot of progress there. He's going to continue to make a lot of progress there. They love his work attitude. They love his coachability, which hasn't always been the case with some of the other guys you mentioned. So I think there's still a world of possibility for Pedro. I think Poisson, he's made progress. He's still, like can fall into this I'm swinging at whatever I want to swing at kind of thing. But he's made some progress. He's also still, I think, one of the 10 youngest players in that league. And it was a very, very aggressive assignment for him to go out to low A last year. But I think Pedro is probably a little more polished than Robert, even though Robert's had an extra year of pro ball.
Do you know what the reasoning was for that assignment of Poisson last year? Because it didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, part of it was, frankly, they just needed him to be there because he was healthy, and they didn't. They had a number of injuries in spring training, and they needed someone to be there. And I think they felt like, what he hadn't seen in the DR, because he had not been part of like a regular league or anything, was just elite velocity and the way that professional pitchers approach hitters. He was just mostly showcase kind of stuff. So, I think they felt like baptism by fire. And there were several times where they thought about sending him back to Arizona, and they felt like he was learning more in that environment than he would have been in Arizona. And to his credit, he never dropped his head. He didn't give up. He just kept going out there and pushing forward. So, development's kind of not a linear thing. He's certainly shown in flashes the talent that everybody had seen from him. So that it's in there, I think they can be patient and kind of see where it comes. And it may just be one of those things where it takes a couple of years of bad numbers and then all of a sudden things come together for him, or it never does. But I think that talent is still in there for him.
So Melissa, we've touched on most of the A's prospects that I have in my top 20. But is there anyone that you think we really need to hit on who's maybe more highly thought of? And then a follow up to that, is there anyone who's really under the radar right now that you've been hearing really good things about?
Yeah, I mean, I think, two guys that probably are a little more well-known out of last year's draft are Denzel Clarke and Mason Miller. And Mason's been rehabbing a minor injury in spring training right now. So hopefully he gets out, but he was throwing 100 in spring. And I think he's going to be a pretty exciting arm to join that group we talked about earlier when he's healthy. But Denzel Clarke is just, I don't know how he got to the fourth round. Obviously there was not a lot of time to see him play at Northridge because of the pandemic. And there's still some polishing that needs to be done that maybe you wouldn't normally see with a college player just because he didn't get a ton of time there. And coming over from Canada, he hadn't necessarily played as many games as like a kid from Southern California would have. But he's got power, he's got speed, he can throw. He's a guy that's a smart hitter. He can use the whole field. If the mechanics stuff smooths out for him, he could move really quickly, even though they started him in low A, I think just to give him a little bit of space. He could become a really exciting prospect very, very quickly. And then, just sort of as like some of the more little fun under the radar guys, Max Schumann's a guy that stole more than 50 bases last year. I think he moved up 3 levels. He's never going to be like probably a superstar starter or anything, but he's the kind of guy that gets on a roster and comes off a bench and steals a lot of bases, and he can play all the infield positions and center field. So just sort of a fun, like under the radar type player for, fantasy purposes that can give you those. The stolen bases thing is such a fun area, and you don't see that much in the A's system. So he kind of stands out that way.
Yeah, that's a good name. Max Schumann. And then just quickly circling back on Clarke. Yeah, I almost asked you about him, but it's tough to really know how real it is when it's a 21-year-old who's about to turn 22 at low A. But yeah, you're right. I mean, he's really producing right now. I mean, if they hit on, with Gelof, Muncy, and Clarke, that could be a really strong class of position players from last year's draft.
Yeah, I think so. And it just, if you see Clarke physically, that Stockton's worn the same uniform for like 20 years, right? So you've seen a lot of players move in there. You've seen like Chris Carter's go through there and different players fill that out. He fills out a uniform. He's a physical specimen. He looks like he plays middle linebacker in the NFL. So it's going to be very interesting to see what he can do with his physical tools and his work ethic, because it's a pretty exciting package.
He's listed at 6'5", 220. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, I think the 220 might be a little bit on the low side. Like
Okay.
he's probably like 6'5", 240. Yeah.
And he's still running well?
Yeah, I think they said like that's the thing where they're like, well, eventually he'll probably have to be like a right fielder, but he's got the long strides and he's got that. His mom was a Olympic track athlete for Canada, and he's got that like sprinter mentality too. That once he gets going, he's really off on his horse. So who knows? Some of those guys that it can keep it even at that body build. So it'll be interesting to see. But the power, I think, will come, and it'll be really, really impressive with him.
All right. Well, that's awesome. Great report on Clarke there. Melissa, why don't you let everyone know where they could follow you and follow your work?
Yeah, you can find my stuff at The Athletic and on Twitter at Melissa Lockard. It's Lockard. Everyone likes to put an H in there, but there's no H. So you can find me on Twitter there. And thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're busy, but this was awesome. I was so glad you were able to make it. This has been the RotoWire Prospect Podcast. I'll be back with you next week.